a bit about some of my relatives today. Not boasting about them, but just because I know their situations better than I know most people's situations. And so I want to talk about people's situations, I guess. And last weekend was my class reunion, so I went back home. And in the short time I was there, we went out to the farm where my dad grew up. And my grandpa and my grandma raised 9 kids on a quarter section of land out in North Dakota. And right across the road from them is the farm where my grandpa grew up. And his dad, Stephen, I believe his name was a very progressive farmer. He moved here, I believe, straight from Sweden in about 1890, and within a few years had built up a farm to include 9 quarters of land, which back in that time was a huge farm. He had one of the biggest barns you can ever build back then. I've never seen a barn that down in the 1970s, I believe. And he started his own cheese company, which I don't believe is long gone out of existence. But he was extremely successful. And he was, living the American dream. Moved here, I suspect, as a teenager, and by the time he was in his 30s and 40s, man, he had accumulated incredible wealth. When a lot of his neighbors were going broke and would move away and lose their farm to taxes, he would go and buy the farms, and that's how he accumulated all of his land. And so he was, like I say, incredibly wealthy. He had, I believe, 6 or 7 children. And the farm, you can know, some farms, just everything is done right and everything is done at the right time, and that's the way his farm operated. Now, when he was in his 40s or late 30s, I believe, he went to Chicago. He went there to do some preaching, I guess, and somehow ended up in jail. I don't know how this all happened, nobody knows. And was killed while he was in jail. And so he had accumulated all of this wealth and left it to his children, who for the next 40 years did not do a very good job of farming his farm. In the first reading it says, I hated all my toil in which I had toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to those who come after me, and who knows whether they will be wise or foolish. Well, he accumulated a lot of wealth, and the people that came after him were, I guess, more foolish than wise, because they did not do a good job of farming. The next person is my grandfather. My grandfather is, now let me go back to my great-grandfather for just a second. He really was, when you think about people in our society and what we value in society, he really was the kind of person that we look up to and admire. He was, like I said, living the American dream, and he took advantage of all of the opportunities that America offered him. And he went from owning nothing to a wealthy man by working hard and being smart and doing the right things. So my grandfather, on the other hand, though, was just about as opposite as you can get. He was not very aggressive. He did not work particularly hard. In fact, I remember my father saying one time that from the age of 6 on, my father basically ran the farm. Even though his father was there, my dad at the age of 6. And so it's no wonder my dad, has a work ethic like you can't imagine. But he just, people would come and offer to buy land. I remember my dad telling one time about somebody from, I think, the ASCS office came and said, here's a quarter of land. And you just don't even have to pay for it right now. You put in a crop. If you get a crop, you can buy it. You pay for it. And oh no, I don't want to do that. He would not take any risk. He had his 1/4 land. He said, we're getting by on this. Why should we do any more work than we have to do? And so he, on the other hand, was the kind of person that our society today says, you know, what's wrong with this guy? There's no ambition, there's no goal to succeed, there's no drive to become wealthy and rich and take over the world. And so we, as in our society today, can, you know, look down on that kind of person. And that's unfortunate, I guess, but that's the way our society is today. Next person is my Uncle Jim. I have two rich relatives growing up. One was Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim was a character. He moved out to Colorado, and while he was there, would buy 80 acres or 180 acres, however much, out in the mountains, and he would divide it into 1 or 2 acre lots and sell them off. And he made a lot of money. In the early 70s, he was worth a couple $1 million. And he was in his 50s, and he decided, I'm going to do one more project and retire. He bought a chunk of land just a little bit further from Denver than what he normally had. And he divided it up, spent all the money he needed to do all of this, invested his $2 million basically in this project. And then the energy crisis hit. And nobody wanted to drive as far away as his land was. And he couldn't sell any of it. And he lost everything he had. He came to visit us right after that in North Dakota. He had a borrowed car and a suitcase in the trunk. And all of his worldly possessions were in that suitcase. He had lost everything he owned. My other rich relative was my Uncle Larry. Larry lived in Sioux Falls. And what he did is he bought houses, larger, older houses, and he divided them into 3 or 4 apartments and rented out the apartments. He said, I never bought a house that I couldn't cash flow. And so by the time he was 65 or 70, he had accumulated several $1 million worth of properties in Sioux Falls. Guy came along, he wanted to retire real bad. The guy came along and said, I'll buy it from you. If you'll give me a contract for deed, I'll put down a couple $100,000 and give me a contract for deed on the rest. He said, well, okay. A little while later, the guy came back and said, say, I need you to sign off that it's okay for me to take a mortgage on this so that I can buy some more houses. He was reluctant, but he finally said, all right, fine. Well, the guy took the money and went off to South America, and my uncle never saw him again. And he didn't get the houses back. He basically lost everything that he had spent his entire life working to obtain. A friend of mine in 2099 or 2000 told me that he had a couple $1 million in his 401k, and even though he was only in his upper 50s, he said, I'm going to retire in 2 years. 2002, I'm going to retire. I've got enough money set aside, I can do it. Well, you all know what happened in the stock market in late 2000. And then after September 11th, 2002, the market crashed even more. He's still working. He's probably 67, 68 now. But because of that, he couldn't retire when he wanted to. Most of you have heard of Bill Gates. In fact, I'm sure you all have. Bill Gates today is supposedly the richest man in the world. At least I've heard that he is, for sure, the richest man in America. Way back when he was, I believe, still in college or right out of college, he had an appointment to meet with IBM. IBM was developing this new personal computer. And he had developed a software program that would run these personal computers. They were looking for the program. The night before, he had done his final test run to make sure it worked, and the next morning he had to be at IBM to show them. And he tried to run the program just to make sure everything was working, and he couldn't get it to work. He stayed up half the night trying to fix it, and whatever he tried, he couldn't get it to work. He finally said, well, I have to go and hope it works when I get there. He got there, he turned on the computer, and it worked. If it hadn't worked, we would never have heard of Bill Gates. Instead, he made billions and billions of dollars, and pretty much every computer you have ever seen or run has his software on it. And nobody on the climb to the top was more ruthless than Bill Gates. I believe, and I haven't seen the movie, but they did a movie of his life and they called it Pirates, because he stole all of his ideas from competitors. He wrote his software so that the competitors' programs wouldn't work with his operating system, which was in every computer, basically every personal computer ever made, so that he could be the only one selling software to your computers. And he made billions of dollars. In the gospel today, the man in the parable that Jesus is talking about was a very successful farmer. In today's terms, he would be, the Bill Gates. He's the guy that was living the American dream. He was the one that could turn a penny into $1 million overnight. He was the guy that all of us would admire and say, wow, look at how good he's doing. And although there might be some jealousy, we can't help but admire how well this guy was operating. He was like my great-grandfather, that everything was done on time and everything was done right, and the crops produced abundantly for him. And so he is faced with the dilemma, where do I put all of my money? Where do I put all of the crops that I've grown? My barns aren't big enough. So he decided, wow, we're going to build bigger and bigger barns. And I have so much wealth, I don't even have to work anymore. I'm going to sit back, eat, drink, and be merry. This is the person whose success in America today we say, wow, that's great. Look at how well he's done. We admire this kind of person that has been so successful, like Bill Gates. And yep, I admit there's, probably jealousy. Why didn't I figure that out before he did? But Jesus says that at the very night, his soul was demanded of him, and everything he had accumulated was gone. Just as so many people lost so much in 2002, and how both of my uncles lost everything that they had accumulated in their life. This man lost everything, including his life. And what's going to happen to everything after he is gone? And what is wrong with being successful? It's that, that's our goal in America is, he who has the most toys wins, right? Isn't that what the bumper sticker says? So what's wrong with that? Well, the man in this story today uses I or me 9 times in those few short verses. He said, what should I do? I have no place to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will put down my barns. I will store all my grain. And I said to my soul, I, me. He was living his life for himself. He didn't care about the hungry neighbors or the people that were poor, the people that were struggling in life. He didn't have a relationship with God. It was all about himself. It was all about me. He didn't care about anybody else. I heard recently that I don't know if Bill Gates has changed his business practices at all or not. But if you follow the news, he has started giving away a significant amount of his money. I don't know how much a year, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year. For scholarships for children, for schools in areas where the poverty rate is really high and the schools are just, not doing very well. All kinds of things. I don't know if one night he all of a sudden, had a revelation, or when he got married and had kids. I don't know what it was that changed, but all of a sudden he realized, you know what? I don't think I can get rid of $50 billion the rest of my life. I want the joy of spreading it around and sharing it with other people that have not had the good fortune that I have had. I don't know if there was any religious transformation there. I have no idea. But there was a change at some point a few years back in his life. And he started giving his wealth away. A few weeks ago, well, I guess a few months ago now, at the Synod Assembly, the first presiding bishop of the ELCA was there. And somebody asked him a question, and I don't remember what the question was, but he was talking about when he was first elected bishop of what was in the LCA in Minnesota. And he went to a church, and the church there was, they were very conservative in what they spent and did with their money. And they were talking about how, we need to keep our money because times could get tough. And one of the guys said, well, so-and-so died a while ago, and he left us a quarter section of land. We've got $100,000 now. He said, never gave anything his whole life, but we've got money now. The guy that the bishop had gone there with, without blinking an eye, said, I want to enjoy gifting and giving while I'm still alive. Now, the point of the story is not that people aren't giving enough. That's not what I'm saying. The point is what's the difference between these people? What's the difference between, somebody that is giving it while they're alive and somebody that is hanging on to it? Somebody that, like the man in the story, who it's all about me compared to the person that, the woman who gave her last 2 coins in the offering plate that Jesus said has given more than everybody else. The difference is, what is the center of their life? Is the center of their life themselves and their possessions, and they believe in that bumper sticker, he who has the most toys wins? Or is God the center of their life? That's what separates these 2 groups of people. Is those that understand that the wealth that I accumulate is a gift from God, and those that believe I have done this on my own. I have all of this wealth, and I have the rest of my life to enjoy it. That's the difference between these 2 groups of people. It says in here, so it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God. What are the treasures? What are the treasures that we store up with God? It isn't physical possessions. What are the treasures that we store up in heaven? I'm not going to answer that. I'll leave that for you to think about. And this really kind of continues next week. I've never done a to-be continued sermon, and I don't really think it's that way, because I won't be here next week.
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. No pressure, but I will leave you with that question. What are the treasures that we store up in